In an ordinary city, people were busy with their daily lives when suddenly, a terrifying toxic smoke began spreading everywhere. The smoke was deadly. Inhaling it meant certain death, and even touching it caused the skin to burn instantly. Hundreds of people were caught in this horrific smoke, trapped inside buildings or trying to escape by climbing to higher places. But the smoke rose quickly, closing in on them and bringing death closer. The story begins in Seoul, South Korea, where we meet a young man named Yong. He is working out in a park, showing off his skills as an excellent mountain climber. In college, he won many medals and earned respect from everyone. But now, his life has changed completely. Despite his talents, he struggles to find a job and feels like a failure. No one respects him anymore, and he worries constantly about his future. One night, Yong meets an old friend for drinks. Both are unemployed, and as they drink, Yong says they might be the most useless people on earth, with nothing to do but sit around. Later at home, Yong watches his parents argue over the TV remote. A small but funny moment in their otherwise financially struggling but happy household. Meanwhile, Yong's older sister, So-hee, scolds him for not cutting his hair and acting lazy. She gives him money for a haircut, but he angrily rejects it, saying he doesn't need charity. When So-hee mentions their mother's upcoming birthday, Yong feels guilty. Things escalate when So-hee finds his old climbing gear and criticizes him for holding on to useless things. Yong throws her out of his room. The story then flashes back 5 years, showing Yong learning mountain climbing at a club where he met a girl named Yuju. They became close friends, though Yuju was far more skilled than him. Back in the present, Yong attends his mother's birthday party at a community center. There, he unexpectedly runs into Yuju, who now works there. They reconnect briefly, and Yong learns she's doing well for herself. Yong knew everything about Yuju and had somehow convinced his sister to hold the party at this venue. He asked Yuju if she was working there as the vice manager, and she confirmed. Yong then complimented her, saying she had become very successful in a short time. Yuju asked him what he was doing now, but Yong lied, claiming he was the vice president of a big company. Yuju mentioned that he seemed more comfortable talking to her now compared to before, when he always seemed uneasy. In reality, years ago, Yong had confessed his feelings to Yuju, but she rejected him, saying they were better off as friends. After that, Yong always felt awkward around her. However, Yong tried to act casual, telling Yuju that he wasn't uncomfortable at all, and that he had just said those things randomly back then. He also joked that they were young at the time. When Yuju asked if he cried after being rejected, Yong denied it, though in truth, he had cried alone at a bus stop. After their conversation ended, Yong returned to the party while Yuju went back to her colleagues. Soon, the manager arrived and told everyone to go home early because they had to come back for work earlier the next day. Once the colleagues left, the manager started flirting with Yuju, calling her sweetie and asking her out on a date. Yuju felt very uncomfortable. At that moment, Yong returned and saw the manager flirting with Yuju, which made him extremely jealous. However, some workers arrived, and the manager left. Meanwhile, in the city, a large truck carrying containers of toxic gas was moving through the streets. The truck stopped near a building, and a man got out, releasing the gas using a machine. The gas began spreading quickly across the city. Back at the party, Yong's mother secretly packed food to take home, but Yong stopped her, saying it would be embarrassing if anyone saw them. When his sister So-hee noticed, she encouraged their mother to pack even more expensive food. Yong was shocked by his sister's behavior. He then saw his father packing bottles of drinks. Meanwhile, So-hee and their cousin went on stage to sing, leaving Yong completely confused about how to handle his chaotic family. As the toxic gas spread across the city, it looked like fog descending on the ground. Many people were excited, mistaking it for a strange weather phenomenon, and even took pictures with the smoke. However, the gas was deadly. Touching it caused severe burns, and inhaling it led to death within minutes. Chaos erupted as people realized the danger and began running for their lives. Many were trapped inside buildings, and those who inhaled the gas died instantly. A burning car lost control and crashed into the truck carrying the gas, causing one of the tanks to fall into the building where Yong's mother's party was happening. The tank exploded, releasing even more toxic gas inside the building. Everyone panicked and tried to escape. Yong quickly ran to Yuju and told her everything about the gas. Yuju immediately rushed to activate the emergency alarm and went to every room, telling everyone to evacuate immediately. Yong and his family rushed to the ground floor of the building and tried to leave as quickly as possible. However, once they stepped outside, Yong realized the situation was far worse than expected. People were running in all directions, trying to save themselves as chaos engulfed the entire city. No one seemed to understand what had happened so suddenly. From a distance, Yong noticed a thick, fog-like toxic gas spreading across the city. The gas was now heading straight toward them, leaving no clear escape route. Just then, Yuju arrived and urged everyone to move to the upper floors of the building. Everyone began heading upstairs, but Young's sister Sohee had already gotten into their car. As she stepped out, she came into contact with the toxic gas and accidentally inhaled it. She began choking and struggling to breathe. Yong quickly carried her on his shoulder and brought her back inside. Sohee's condition worsened, leaving Yong and his family extremely worried. Yong immediately called an ambulance, and Yuju provided their address. When Yong and Yuju looked out the window, they were horrified to see the entire city engulfed in toxic smoke. There was no sign of anyone on the streets. Both were terrified as the gas began rising rapidly, making escape impossible. Yong then told everyone they needed to get to the rooftop immediately because the gas was moving upward quickly. However, Sohee's condition was still critical, so everyone prepared to carry her upstairs. At that moment, everyone received a text message warning about the toxic gas spreading across the city. It advised people to move to the nearest rooftop and call 911 for help. Everyone rushed to the roof, but upon arriving, they found the door locked. Despite multiple attempts, it wouldn't open. The manager suddenly remembered he had left the key to the rooftop on a lower floor. But by now, the lower floors were filled with toxic gas, making it impossible to retrieve the key. Outside, rescue teams were trying to stop people from entering the city, but the roads were jammed with vehicles, complicating their efforts. All routes into the city were blocked. Back in the building, Yong and the others desperately tried to break down the rooftop door, but it was too strong to budge. Frustrated, some people confronted the manager, accusing him of not knowing how to handle the situation. He explained that the door was highly advanced and could only be opened with the key, or from the inside. Hearing this, Yuju insisted they had no choice but to retrieve the key from below, even if it meant risking their lives. Yuju led the way back to their floor, and everyone followed, quickly taking refuge in a secure area. They began searching everywhere for the key. Meanwhile, a news report on TV described the deadly nature of the gas spreading through the city. It warned that anyone who came into contact with it would experience severe burning sensations in their eyes and face, followed by difficulty breathing. Without immediate treatment, death would occur within a short time. Many people had already died due to the gas. The news also explained how the gas affected the body and what precautions could prevent exposure. To protect themselves, people were advised to wear full-body protective clothing and a special mask that would prevent even the smallest amount of gas from entering. The mask had to be changed every 10 minutes. Hearing this, the manager rushed to fetch masks. Meanwhile, a girl informed everyone that a rescue team had arrived near their building and was evacuating people using helicopters. However, Yong noticed on TV that smaller buildings posed challenges for rescues due to limited space. Additionally, people taking shelter in smaller buildings were harder to spot from helicopters, reducing their chances of being saved. Worried that the rescue team might not see them, Yong quickly moved to a glass window of the building. He asked Uiju if reaching the rooftop was possible once he got there, and she confirmed it was, but warned him not to attempt it, fearing he might fall. Ignoring her, Yong used trophies to break the glass after repeated attempts. Once the glass shattered, he decided to climb to the rooftop despite Uju's fear, as the building was very tall with many floors to cross. If he fell, survival would be impossible. Uju tried to stop him. He asked her to bring him a rope. Meanwhile, others learned of Young's plan and informed his family. As Young tied a rope around his waist, his father appeared, refusing to let him go. Soon, his mother also arrived. Seeing this, Young quickly jumped outside, grabbing onto a grill of a nearby building. While everyone held onto the rope tightly, Yong instructed them to release it gradually as needed. Climbing onto the balcony of the adjacent building, he assessed how to reach the rooftop easily. Watching this, Yuju quickly brought him some mountain climbing gear. Using his climbing skills, Yong began ascending floor by floor. At one point, while trying to climb using a rod, the rod broke, causing him to fall briefly. This left his parents extremely worried, but Yuju assured them he was fine and slowly making progress. Someone filmed Young's climb through a window, showing his efforts to scale the building. Having trained extensively in mountain climbing, Yong applied his techniques to climb efficiently. The building was so tall that halfway up, Yong grew exhausted and rested for a while. When he resumed, he used decorative stones embedded in the wall to continue climbing. However, the rope hindered his progress, so he eventually untied it, leaving himself without safety gear. Watching this, everyone panicked. Yuju shouted at him, calling him reckless and urging him to return, but Yong ignored her. Saving his family and helping others had become his sole responsibility. As Yong neared the rooftop, he encountered a large statue. Gripping it carefully, he prepared to make his final ascent. Part of the statue broke again, but Yong managed to grab another section with his other hand, saving himself. Slowly, he climbed onto the statue, which was on the verge of collapsing completely. Just in time, Yong leaped onto the rooftop. Seeing this, everyone below began moving upward. Yong quickly opened the rooftop door, and upon seeing him safe, everyone was relieved, though his parents scolded him harshly. His father warned him never to do anything so reckless again, but Yong assured them he was fine and told them to focus on how they would all survive. They waited for the rescue team, and soon a helicopter appeared in the distance. Everyone waved their hands and shouted for help. Yong even leaned over the edge of the rooftop while calling out, but a boy pulled him back just in time. Despite their efforts, the helicopter couldn't spot them. Yong then instructed everyone to turn on their phone flashlights, hoping the rescue team would see them. Meanwhile, news channels reported that the person responsible for releasing the gas had been identified as a scientist conducting dangerous experiments. The police located his lab but found nothing useful inside. It was revealed that the scientist had been expelled years ago for unethical experiments but had secretly continued his work, eventually creating the toxic gas as an act of revenge against a company. Back on the rooftop, Yong and the others kept trying to signal the helicopter using flashlights and shouting, but their voices didn't reach. Someone brought a microphone and speaker, and they used it to call for help. Though another helicopter approached, it was too far to notice them or hear their cries, leaving everyone deeply worried. Suddenly, Yuju had an idea. She noticed large illuminated signs on the building and rushed to the control room to repeatedly turn the lights on and off. Since the letters were huge, the rescue team finally spotted them and headed toward the rooftop. Everyone cheered in relief. Meanwhile, Uju hurried back upstairs but slipped on the stairs, dropping her phone to the ground below. The rescue team arrived with their helicopter and began loading people one by one. As the helicopter reached its weight limit, Yuju and Yong were left behind. The rescue team refused to take more passengers, explaining the risk. Yong pleaded with them to at least take Yuju, insisting he could stay behind. Though Yuju didn't want to leave without Yong, she eventually agreed. After much persuasion, the rescue team departed with the others, leaving Yong and Yuju on the rooftop. Yong's parents also wanted to stay behind, unwilling to leave their son, but Yong convinced them that another helicopter would arrive soon. He promised to join them shortly. After the first helicopter left, no other helicopters arrived for a long time. Yong and Yuju grew increasingly scared. Yuju even started crying, fearing they might not survive. Just then, they spotted another helicopter approaching. They were relieved, but was heading to another building where people were trapped. Despite their attempts to signal it, the helicopter didn't notice them. Yong looked down from the rooftop and saw the toxic smoke slowly rising closer. It would soon engulf the roof completely, so they needed to move to an even higher place quickly. The only option was the rooftop of a nearby taller building. They rushed downstairs, gathering climbing gear, ropes, water, masks, and protective clothing. Meanwhile, Yong's parents had taken Sohee to the hospital, where she was recovering after treatment. At the same time, Yong's younger sister repeatedly tried calling him. The building Yong and Yuju were in was now filled with toxic gas. Fully covered and wearing masks, they ran toward a taller building. The smoke made it hard to see the streets clearly. Yong noticed that their masks would only last 10 minutes, so they had to find shelter quickly. They entered a nearby building and climbed to the top floor, but the toxic gas had already reached there, making it unsafe. With only one mask left, Yong quickly changed his mask, leaving Yuju feeling betrayed. She thought he was abandoning her to save himself, but Yong tried explaining something through his mask, though neither could understand each other. Yong then ran off, leaving Yuju behind. Shocked and heartbroken, she couldn't believe he would deceive her like this after she thought so highly of him. Meanwhile, Yong's parents arrived at a rescue camp searching for him, but grew anxious when they couldn't find him. Yong, on the other hand, had returned to the streets and found devices that could extend the effectiveness of masks. He had noticed them earlier in the building, but hadn't paid attention then. Now, he collected them and headed back to Yuju. The area where Yuju stood was slowly filling with toxic gas, so she struggled to move to a higher spot. Heartbroken by Yong's actions, she felt he had pushed her toward death to save himself. She questioned whether his love for her was real, believing today proved otherwise. As Yuju stood there lost in thought, Yong suddenly appeared behind her. Overwhelmed with emotion, Yuju angrily hit him. But Yong quickly replaced her mask's device, saving her. He explained that he was lucky to find a staircase on the other side, which allowed him to return quickly. Young's father urgently got into a taxi, determined to rescue his son. Despite repeated pleas from Young's father, the driver stood his ground until a Marine soldier, an acquaintance of Young's father, intervened. With the Marine's authority, the driver reluctantly agreed and set off toward the city. Meanwhile, Yong and Yuju entered a tall building, attempting to reach its rooftop for safety. However, the rooftop door was locked, forcing them to retreat downstairs in search of another exit. Prolonged use of their masks had left them struggling to breathe, so they removed them briefly in a safer spot. They then decided to cross over to another building using climbing gear. After setting up a rope between the two buildings, Yuju crossed first. As Young followed, smoke began billowing out of a nearby chimney, terrifying them both. Unable to proceed, Young quickly retreated, put his mask back on, and used a gym tool to set up another rope. Moving as fast as he could, he managed to cross safely. Nearby, two journalists from a news channel arrived at the riverbank with a drone to capture footage of the disaster. Their goal was to broadcast exclusive coverage and boost their channel's ratings. While news reports revealed that water could neutralize the toxic gas, causing it to vanish completely upon contact. Rescue teams immediately began dousing affected areas with water to reduce the gas's impact. However, since the gas had spread throughout the city, bringing the situation under control would still take time. Young's father reached the riverbank near the city, hoping to find and rescue his son. At the same time, Young and Yuju climbed onto the rooftop of a large shopping mall. Young called the rescue team, urgently requesting help. While there, Yuju noticed several statue-like boards and came up with an idea. She suggested telling the rescue team that 20 people were trapped, which would prompt a faster response. Young relayed the false information, and together they arranged the boards to resemble human figures. They began shouting for help. Soon they heard noises from a neighboring building, a school, and saw children trapped in a classroom, calling for help. Young and Yuju instructed them to head to the rooftop, but the children explained the door was locked, preventing their escape. Spotting a small ladder near the classroom wall, Yuju realized someone could climb it to unlock the rooftop door. They guided one brave child, who carefully ascended. When the child nearly fell, everyone worked together to pull him up safely. Just then, the rescue team Young had contacted arrived to save them. Before leaving, Young glanced back at the children, ensuring they were now safe. Seeing the children in a highly panicked state, Young and Yuju felt deep sympathy. They decided to prioritize rescuing the children over their own escape, fearing that if something happened to the kids while they saved themselves, it would cost many young lives. To signal for help, they lay on the rooftop and used various items to create a large arrow visible from above. Spotting this, the rescue team quickly headed to the school where the children were trapped. After rescuing the kids, the team left, leaving Young and Yuju behind. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted in the city, causing the toxic smoke to spread even faster. Realizing the smoke was rapidly approaching, Young and Yuju grew terrified. At that moment, Yuju noticed a tall crane on a distant building where they could find temporary safety. A bridge connected the two buildings, so they opened a window, crossed the bridge, and began running toward the crane. Meanwhile, Young's father bribed some journalists to locate his son using their drone cameras. The journalists easily found Young, and seeing him alive overwhelmed his father with joy. Two police officers soon arrived, ordering everyone to leave. Though reluctant, they complied. When the officers learned Young was still trapped in the city, they fell silent. One journalist live-streamed the drone footage on national TV, showing Young and Yuju crossing the bridge. This broadcast reached every corner of the country, with people watching anxiously. Gamers, influencers, and bloggers reacted live to their struggle. Relying on their mountain climbing training from college, Young and Yuju scaled tall structures with ease. Their skills helped them reach a high rooftop near the crane building. However, crossing to the crane required setting up a rope over a wide gap, which seemed nearly impossible. Just then, the drone's battery died, cutting off the live feed. Alone and hopeless, Young and Yuju cried, believing their lives were over as the toxic smoke crept closer. Moments later, several drones appeared, sent by people across the city to help. Together, the drones created airflow to push the smoke downward, buying Yong and Yuju more time. Using hand signals, Yong instructed one drone operator to attach a rope. The drone successfully secured the rope to a pipe on the opposite building. As Yong and Yuju began crossing, they got stuck midway. The rope started slipping from the pipe, so Yuju quickly cut it, hoping to use the remaining length to reach the building. But as they neared the structure, the rope slipped entirely, causing both of them to fall. The drone crashed and broke, ending the live stream. Believing Yong and Yuju had died, everyone, including Yong's family, was devastated. However, a rescue team later entered the city to search for them. After a long and fruitless search, they were about to leave when one member spotted a signal from the crane. Rushing over, they discovered Yong and Yuju alive, surviving on top of the tall crane. The rescue team quickly brought them to safety. When Yong's family and Sohee learned he was safe, they were overjoyed. The next morning, Yong and Yuju were taken to the rescue camp, where Yong's family greeted him with immense joy and celebration. Meanwhile, Yuju called her family to assure them she was fine. At that moment, her manager arrived, calling her sweetie as if he had played a role in her rescue, despite ignoring her earlier. Yuju punched him and warned him never to call her that again. Yuju then went to see Yong, thanking him sincerely for standing by her through such a difficult situation. She also confessed that she had liked him for a long time, essentially expressing her love. Overwhelmed with happiness, Yong was thrilled by her words. Suddenly, heavy rain began pouring over the city. Once the rain stopped, it was announced that all the toxic smoke had vanished, and its effects were completely neutralized. The city was declared safe again, and life returned to normal. With this, the story comes to an end.